Hi, I'm Bill, the Domestic Monk. Welcome back to another video, and thanks very much for watching. So I'm excited today to have an opportunity to talk to Dr. Robert Haddad, who lives in Sydney, Australia. And I found his YouTube channel a couple of months ago. I've been watching your videos, Dr. Haddad, and they're fantastic, positive, pro-Catholic apologetic of content, which is really what I think we need on YouTube. And in this interview, focusing on what seems to be your area of expertise, which is apologetics, I really wanted to talk about the new evangelization, what it is, and what it should mean for us as practicing Catholics. Before we do, though, can you give us a little background on you, how you got started in apologetics, and what led you into this field?
Oh, well, thank you, Bill, and thank you for having me on your program. I've been a Catholic educator for 35 years, formally, in schools, universities, and other institutions. I work in the Archdiocese of Sydney at the moment, this Catholic Archdiocese, as manager of faith formation for staff in Sydney Catholic schools. And that's a lot of staff. It's about 10,000. We've got 147 schools in a network. But basically, to go back to the origins, you can go back to 1979 when I was a teenager, and I was in a public school, a government school. I never had Catholic education, and I was invited to go to the Billy Graham Crusade in Sydney in May 1979. And I was invited by a friend of mine at school who was a Baptist, evangelical Baptist. I didn't know about those things at the time, and I before then I knew I was a Catholic and I believed in God, and I was praying about 1 minute a day, but not much else. And I went to this event, and it had an impact on me, and I did the altar call, and I went down to give myself to Jesus Christ. Even though I already believed in Him, I was going down to take it more seriously and consistently. Anyway, following from that, I would have more contact with the Baptists, regular, and other evangelicals in my school through the Interschool Christian Fellowship gatherings we had once a week at lunchtime. And then later on, when I went to university, I was doing a law degree at Sydney Law School. So I would attend the Evangelical Union Bible studies or talks there as well. And I found them rather substantive. And by comparison, I found the Catholic group very weak, and I found myself as a Catholic had been very weak. But through these contacts with the Baptists and other evangelicals in these Bible studies, I began to encounter a lot of consistent anti-Catholic comments and questions. Now, I was Catholic. I knew I was Catholic, and I wanted to stay Catholic, but I didn't know much about the Catholic faith and how to defend it. I would hear objections and criticisms from time to time, and they would very much worry me. I just just wanted answers, but I didn't have them, and I didn't know where to find them. So I had a lot of doubts about the Catholic faith, particularly from scripture perspectives. These friends of mine would raise all the usual objections against Catholicism, the Pope, infallibility, Mary, statues, the Mass, the Eucharist, sacraments, infant baptism, and it goes on and on. I guess my Catholic conversion happened in early 1986. Now, I dropped out of law school because I had health issues. And while I was at a friend's house, a very staunch Catholic friend of mine, who I still have some contact with many decades later, I found a book in his office just sitting on a chair. It was called The Question Box by Father Conway. Now, this was a book printed originally in the United States in New York in the 1880s, and this was an original copy from the 1880s.
Wow.
So it was old, the cover had fallen off, the pages were very brown, but it was a very substantive book. You can still get it on Amazon. and it's nearly 450 pages. And I took it home because I saw it was question answer format, and I read the whole book in 2 days. And it was the fastest book I've ever read in my life because I was voracious. I was hungry. I saw in this book all these questions and objections that I was receiving for many years. Now, that was nearly 7 years of objections, questions I couldn't answer. But this book had all those questions and all the answers. And the answers were heavily based in scripture, plus introduced to me new persons I'd never heard of before, namely the fathers of the church. Particularly what they wrote about the Eucharist or the Mass was most important to me. From then on, I was convicted as a Catholic, and I'm very, very determined now to be able to answer all the questions and objections I received. And that's basically the foundation of it. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm 61 years old. Are you roughly the same age as I am?
Yeah, I just turned 60 last month. Yes.
So I'm so curious. You were raised in Australia. I was raised in the United States on the East Coast, and I had a very similar experience as yours. I was raised in a Catholic church. I always wanted to be Catholic. I was very comfortable being Catholic, but I didn't know anything about the faith really. And as I got into my 20s and started maturing and I turned back to the faith, a lot of my evangelical friends were trying to pull me that way. And I had a similar experience with a guy named Chuck Smith in Calvary Chapel out here. It's a big church in Southern California at the time that kind of caused me, listening to his radio show, caused me to turn and look at my faith and learn like you did. And I became more Catholic because of that. And so that's interesting. But a lot of us, maybe we'll get into this a little more, we just weren't catechized that well. That period after Vatican II, it was just kind of clumsy, and I just don't think many of us, but thank God and the Holy Spirit, right? It reached out to us sooner or later.
Yeah, well, God captured you and me and convicted us both from the Catholic faith through our Protestant contacts. And I think that's the good that God takes out of those encounters. If I didn't have those encounters, I don't know where I would be today.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm so glad I had those encounters, those events, because they were stepping stones for me. They weren't what I wanted to be. They weren't what I should ultimately be, but they gave me more conviction to be a person of prayer, a person of faith, a believer in Jesus Christ, a better person in general, following the Ten Commandments. And then, of course, a determination to be able to give those reasoned explanations about our Catholic faith, particularly to objectors who are rather hostile. Yeah. There's a lot of angry, and I'm sure you've met them too, there's a lot of angry anti-Catholics out there.
And a lot of former Catholics.
Yeah,
who are
and probably the angriest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. So let's transition into this. So what I really want to talk about is evangelization. And it's difficult. You know, when I was growing up, we weren't taught to evangelize really. And as an adult, I became aware of a couple of things in Scripture which really got my attention and turned me towards evangelization. And one, of course, is from Matthew, the big one, right? Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, which, of course, is known as the Great Commission. And then the second one from St. Peter, always be ready to make a defense to anyone who demands of you an accounting for the hope that's in you. So, you know, when I looked at those, I see kind of two things. I see the first one being a command from Jesus to the church, which is what I always, through most of my life, felt that it was the church's position to evangelize. And then the second one, though, that hits you in the heart. It's like, that's to you. How do you see those things? Is that what evangelization is? And what's the difference between the role of the church and our responsibility as individual Catholics?
Well, I think firstly, each and every one of us have an obligation to witness, to evangelize, and to give a reasoned explanation. And those two quotes that you raised, they They're in tandem. They're brothers and sisters. There can't be one without the other. The fact that we're baptized and confirmed is the reason why we should be witnessing, is the reason why we should be evangelizing, and the reason why we should be given reasoned explanations or defending our faith. And that is where I think the big gap is. The church institutional, obviously, the church is an institution. It's necessary that it is. It's visible, has a hierarchy, a teaching authority, a governing authority. But we can't be asleep at the wheel personally. We can't say, hey, it's for the Pope and the bishops and the clergy and the religious to do all that. They probably carried that predominantly before the Vatican Council, and so Catholics were, the laity probably before the council were pretty much pray, pay, and obey, and which is very passive, and rather than being active. And of course, there were very serious issues after the council. There was a lot of falling away and a lot of crisis developing in the church, and the laity weren't catechized. So many of the laity weren't catechized satisfactorily. You and myself are two examples. But that's where the first responsibility lies with us, our personal witness, and witnessing through example and holiness, primarily before the word. Now we need the word, but we need our witness, our personal example. Then we can get more active in the sense of working with the church at a parish level or a diocesan level or an archdiocesan level. And that's what I do. I have both elements in my life. I have my personal life, my personal faith, and what I do privately with my YouTube and my Instagram and talks that I do in parishes and conferences or events. That's personal. But I have my institutional work, which is in Sydney Catholic schools. And it's my professional work. It's how I earn a living. It's how I get paid. They're just two sides of the same coin. We should not have one without the other.
And so all of us have a vocation, and we have a responsibility, even if we have a private vocation, not in a religious capacity, we still have an obligation as Catholics to evangelize in the way we live and set an example for others in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. You don't have to be a clergy, you don't have to be religious, and you don't have to be a professional Catholic. You don't have to be a Catholic teacher or professor or theologian or philosopher. It comes from our baptism and confirmation. So wherever we are, whatever we're doing, whatever work we're engaged in, medicine, law, engineering, science, or going down just be someone who's a bricklayer or a carpenter or someone working in what we say here in Australia, a garbage collector, it doesn't matter, right? By virtue of our baptism and confirmation, we should be faithful witnesses.
Perfect. And so that brings us to this term, the new evangelization. So at some point, that comes into the church. Now, we know the church has always evangelized, obviously, but what specifically is the new evangelization? Like, where did it come from, and what does that mean for us?
Well, it's a call from St. John Paul II back in 1983 when he was on an apostolic visit to Africa. And he mentioned it there. And I have been aware of the term, and I'm aware of what he said: new methods, new ardor, new enthusiasm. And many have written and many have pondered about what that means exactly. How is a new evangelization different from old evangelization?
Exactly.
Some people are confused, some people are cynical. Now, I did my doctoral project on new apologetics. And so people ask the question, well, it's something similar. It's basically a parallel, brother with new evangelization, new apologetics. Okay, because John Paul II in 1999, not as well known as 1983, but in 1999, to the bishops of Western Canada who came to Rome for an ad limina visit, also called for a new apologetics. But when you look at that, and when I've studied it, I found that the new apologetics was really 1 Peter 3:15. Always give a reasoned explanation for the hope that is in you but do it with gentleness and reverence.
Right.
And much of my apologetical work was fruitless for many years because I tended to forget that bit, the gentleness and reverence. And we have to be very careful then. This is what I'm finding about Instagram apologetics. It's not the best platform for apologetics because it can be rather heated. You get aggressive attacks, caustic attacks, insults, and you tend to get trapped in that and respond in kind, which is
Right.
very, very problematic and will never be fruitful. But okay, so new apologetics, just to sidetrack for a little bit, is basically really the scriptural injunction of St. Peter. Now, if you new evangelization, it's still the same objective. It's to bring people to the true God, to bring people to Jesus Christ, and for us as Catholics, to bring people to Jesus Christ in his church, the church he established, the Catholic Church. It's just a question of looking at the circumstances of modern society. 1983 was a lot different to how things were in 1953, or or in any other time, any other century, or even back in the Apostolic Age. We have enormous new challenges, plus enormous new threats, but also enormous new technologies and means of evangelization. And I think John Paul II had in mind those new methods. New ardor means new enthusiasm, because he was, as Pope, he was aware that immediately after the council, something went awry. We weren't taking up the evangelization as we ought to, as we were previously. Catechesis also fell away compared to what was the case previously. Apologetics, for some mysterious reason, also retreated radically after the council, even though the council is very clear in multiple places about the need for apologetics. And paragraph 6 on the decree for the laity made it very clear that the laity should be involved in apologetics because the challenges of the times, this is 1965, were very serious, let alone 2024. So I think a new evangelization is renewing our enthusiasm, our vigor, and also engaging with the new technologies and new methods out there. And we've said them already. You're doing it now. YouTube didn't exist, 30 years ago. Instagram didn't exist. Likewise, there's TikTok. And we need to get out there, the Catholic message out there. But whatever we engage with by way of new technologies or new methods, the obligation on us to be personal witnesses still remains. Perfect. And that's the traditional evangelization. Witness, example, and people asking questions. What is the source of our happiness? What is the source of our joy? What is the source of our peace? And also, but at the same time, I don't want to eradicate or diminish the need for people to actually use the tongue as well as the example. We need to be still out there inviting people to consider Catholicism.
So you mentioned Pope John Paul II, obviously, which is the who put the ball in motion on this. But even before him, Pope Paul VI, after Vatican Council, is my understanding, put out a call for us to evangelize the fallen away, and that's kind of where my channel to focus on that, because like you, I've tried evangelization with my Protestant brothers and sisters. I convert nobody, and for me, the emphasis is I want to take people like me who are ignorant of the faith, this great, beautiful gift we've been given by Christ for our salvation, and get them to turn toward it and learn about this great thing. And that's what my focus really is, rather than try to get into, do the Trent Horn thing and all these guys on YouTube that are great at it. I'm trying to educate Catholics and get them to look at this faith, not just show up at church on Sunday and then head off to watch football or whatever, but really to look at this pearl of great price. So how can we do that? How can we get a lot of our Catholic brothers and sisters who remain ignorant of the faith energized to embrace it and really take the call to individual holiness seriously?
Yeah, well, look, Sometimes the problem we have with fellow Catholics is that we're not prophets in our own home. And so what I've found, when there are examples that I know of, individual examples that I know of certain Catholics who were lukewarm in their faith and weren't really into evangelization or apologetics, but one day they got challenged by someone, an anti-Catholic, a non-Catholic, an ex-Catholic, whatever. These people had enough in them to say, hey, I'm Catholic. I don't know the answers, but that encounter with that anti-Catholic, non-Catholic, ex-Catholic ignited an interest in them to find answers. And then that might have begun the process of them taking their faith more seriously, searching for the answers, discovering new things, getting excited about that, and then going on a pub. I mention this because that's what happened to my younger brother.
So our role really is to find a way, a respectful way, but to challenge Catholics to take their faith seriously.
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's a single solution to that. It's just that, say we've got friends and relatives who are Catholic and they're very nominal. Those, unfortunately, are legion. What we try to do in work in my professional context, is that we have what's called evangelization days. So we take kids about 1,000, anywhere between 500 and 1,000 out of the normal school context. The boring school lessons.
Yeah.
The drudgery of classrooms, and we take them to an event which is very exciting, very upbeat, and to energize them, to ignite them into the faith. So I call this bypass surgery. We're bypassing the normal avenues and getting, pumping fresh blood into them, or, energy and enthusiasm about their faith. So I guess it's incumbent upon us, if we know someone we love and we're concerned about, who's nominal in their faith and not really going anywhere, of course we pray for them, we befriend them, and we invite them to something which would be interesting or exciting. Come and hear this speaker, come to this event, where they can listen to someone who would be a prophet for them. We're not a prophet. I've used that. I've used it with my own children when they were growing up. I'm trying to teach them the faith. I'm trying to catechize them. And I know that's the moral obligation of all parents. But I also deliberately got other people into the house and as tutors for my children who I trusted, who were faithful Catholics, because I know that they would say the same thing that I was saying. And they would be prophets outside of my home that my children would listen to because they respected them.
That's a great idea. That's as I look back, that's the big mistake I made. I took my kids to church and but I didn't, I felt like I just wasn't where I am today in my faith. I didn't have the knowledge and I relied upon the church, and it was a big mistake as I look back. I wish I'd have taken that more seriously. And I think that's something a lot of Catholic parents of young children need to really take seriously, that their role as the primary teacher of the children is so important.
Well, I found that, even with your children, I have a certain number of children. They're not all the same personalities.
Yeah, exactly.
They are, some are very, very strong in the faith. And, there might be one that's not so strong, but they've still got big rocks there. And I've found the important thing with any children that one might have that is not full on in the faith is to still constantly show that you love them. Connect with them at that level.
Yeah.
So that they know you care, they know you respect them nevertheless, and it will be reciprocal. The love and the respect will be reciprocal. And so you don't end up losing contact or cutting off that child, or that child cutting you off because they feel like you don't love me, you don't like me, you don't. No. But keep that avenue, that pipeline of love flowing, and that would be a foundation for perhaps one day, getting them to click with the faith.
Yeah. Faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately. Okay, so now one of the things, the challenges we have in the Catholic Church is it's such an unwieldy machine. You talk about trying to turn around a battleship. You can't do it on a dime. in your experience, how has, since Vatican II and Pope John Paul VI and then Pope John Paul II, how has the church taking this concept of new evangelization since it's been handed to us, and where are we at with it now?
Look, I would actually say, and I might shock you a little bit here, I think the vast majority of Catholics either don't know what John Paul II said when it came to new evangelization, and some who do know, a significant percentage of them don't care and don't believe and don't want to engage in any kind of so-called new evangelization. I find that new evangelization as a term and as a process, or a form of engagement, is known by faithful Catholics, Orthodox Catholics, and we're still a small minority in certain circles. And we're the ones doing it. We're the ones taking it up. Now, I'll give you an example of a bit of advice that a good friend of mine was given once. You might encounter someone in the future called Charbel Raish here in Australia, and he runs an organisation called Perusia Media. And a lot of Americans know about Charbel because Charbel is the means to get them to Australia and have a platform for their evangelisation and apologetics work in Australia. And he's been very, very successful. And he's been operating for about, nearly 20 years. But we were both very close to Cardinal Pell when he was Archbishop of Sydney. I worked for the Cardinal, and he gave me 3 different jobs over the years. And I had him as a personal friend and had him over my house a few times. And Charbel Raish had him as a personal friend. And Charbel said to me that one day the Cardinal gave him this advice: do your work independently. Don't get formally aligned with the archdiocesan structures or the church. Do what is to be right, and keep control of it yourself, and make it happen. So, because sometimes church bureaucracy can be slow, unwieldy, or even can be a form of resistance or opposition. Sadly, I hope I'm not scandalising anyone, but sadly that's the case. And the Cardinal knew this, and that's why he said, you got a good idea, you got the passion and enthusiasm, well, go do it. And technology is very accessible today. We're on an iPhone today. We've got laptops, and we've got desktops, and we've got all sorts of accessible technology where we can have platforms to get it out there, evangelize at a private level, and without spending too much money or being weighed down by structures.
That's awesome. Cardinal Pell, what an example he was for the faith. I could talk to you about him. That would be a fantastic conversation. But I so agree with you. When you look back in the history of the church, look at St. Francis, right? He wasn't ordained. He just had a conversion and took it to heart. And even like St. Catherine of Sienna, I mean, she was eventually involved with what was it, the Carmelites as a third order or whatever.
Dominicans, yeah.
Dominicans. But they had this passion, and they took this they took their mission out to the world, and they changed the world by doing it. And that's one of the things I try to tell Catholics. Rather than railing, shaking your fist at the church, if you're not seeing the saint in the church, be the saint. I mean, that's our job, right? We are called to be holy, and people don't take that seriously as Catholics. We think it's the priest's job to be holy, the bishop's job to be holy. Well, if we're holy enough as a body, that's going to elevate the priests and the bishops, I think.
Yeah. And so, I love your examples were very good. Both St. Francis of Assisi as a layman, and he became a deacon eventually, but he started as a layman, all the Franciscan order, etc. And St. Catherine of Sienna, most people don't realise that she was, strictly speaking, a laywoman.
Yeah.
Even though she wears the Dominican habit, she was a third order Dominican, but she was a laywoman, and she shook the church and the world to its foundations in the 14th century. It just goes to show what God can achieve through little people.
Exactly.
We are faithful, and we take our mission seriously.
So so you have a tremendous foundation in apologetics. And for people who are intimidated by apologetics, all apologetics really means is that you understand your faith and you have the ability to explain it. And you
Yeah.
need to have an understanding of apologetics to evangelize effectively, even within the Catholic community, because um, there's so much ignorance and misunderstanding within our own church that we
Yeah.
have to overcome. So what's the best way for a layperson to prepare themselves for evangelization, both in their family, in the church, and outside the church?
Well, Bill, I'm going to be very basic here. I'm going to just say it as I really believe it. If you want to be an apologist, if you want to be an evangelist, then get started. There's no prerequisite. There's no one size fits all. There's no qualification. There's no experience necessary. There's no degrees necessary. I've got the degrees now, but they're just icing on the cake. I have worked at this, and by the way, I consider myself an amateur, someone who loves it, who does it part time. And I know there are a lot better apologists in the world, dozens better than I am, and I'm very thankful for that. But we should never say to ourselves, "Hey, I can't be an apologist, or I can't be an evangelist until I whatever." No, that you get started straight away. You start doing things straight away. And guess what? We're going to make mistakes. I've made many mistakes, and I'll probably continue to make mistakes, and we'll always make mistakes. But we only make mistakes because we're trying. And
Excellent.
do something. Just do anything. Get out there, get started, and once you get the ball rolling and you make mistakes, you learn from your mistakes, but you're doing something, shining the light in the darkness, and and you just grow from there.
Exactly. So it's like, don't let good become the enemy of great, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're going to go out, and it's like anything in life. I talk about, when you talk about systems and ways to succeed. Well, God made all the laws, and the laws of success apply to evangelization. So if you go out and you dedicate yourself to it, you're going to get the information you need, and you're going to get the guidance of the Spirit, you may not, like, I remember listening to a video that you were one of your videos, and you talked about a student who you thought would never really adhere to the faith, and years later they came back to you. I don't know if you remember it, and they mentioned something that you said to them when they were in high school that
Mm.
eventually turned them to the faith. And that's, so we don't know what seeds we're planting and how they're going to develop.
Well, absolutely. And um, if we're doing work and we're being challenged and we don't know the answer, that's not a failure. We just say, hey, I don't know. Admit that we don't know. Be humble enough to admit that. Then you got time. Hey, I can get back to you in 24, 48 hours with the answer. And, with the technology we've got today, I'll get back to you on your email. I'll get back to you on a text message, whatever. And yeah, the idea of dropping the seed is extremely important, because you and I have both had a lot of encounters with anti-Catholics, and you say that you've never had any success converting any. I would say that I was an instrument. God does the conversion. I've been in the instrument of the conversion of a certain number. I'm not sure exactly how many, but I was fruitless for 15 years, no conversions whatsoever. But one thing is important. If you're engaged in an apologetic exchange with someone and they say something to be absolutely incorrect, or particularly a prejudice against the Catholic faith that has no foundation, if you can correct them on one thing and they realise that they've been corrected, that could be the beginning of a conversion experience. It's like when you read Scott Hahn's biography, he talks about, hey, he was corrected on the issue of contraception. He saw that the Catholic Church was right on contraception. Oh, they're right on at least one thing. Okay, but that was the hook, and that began the exploration. And if we can manage in our conversations, in dialogue, our exchanges, that we can convince someone that, hey, the Catholic Church is right on at least one thing, that's a good start.
So one last question on this topic. So we've talked about evangelization, the importance of it, our duty as Catholics to be involved in it. And we talked a little bit about apologetics. And that's scary to some people because of confrontation, the possibility of failure, insecurity, whatever. So, what would you recommend? And I think we touched on it a little bit. Are the biggest pitfalls when you're dealing with someone outside the faith that you want to avoid when you're evangelizing to them?
To avoid, firstly, the confrontation aspect. No one likes religious argument. No one likes religious confrontation. And I don't either. But with the new apologetics, if we work on the aspect of love and respect for the other, irrespective of what they believe, then that would disarm any form of the anger, the aggression, that would reduce an encounter to something faith fruitless, right? So if we go into a conversation where, I really love and respect that other person, I just want to try and help them to know the truth, do it gently, do it in conversational mode. That should be the first way of, breaking down any fear about, confrontation or argument, etc., which no one likes. I would look. Apologetics as a word is scary because a lot of people don't even know what it is. They think it's about apologizing. Then people are scared about apologetics when they realize what it means because they think it's a lot of work. Well, it is a lot of work, but it's always going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work for you and me, Bill, and for the rest of our days. I've realized I've come to know about 1% of what I need to know.
Wow, then I'm in trouble.
And if I am to wait until I know everything before I do anything, then I'll never do anything. So that's the other thing we've got to get out of our heads. We don't have to know a lot. We just have to have an interest in the other, a love for the other, and a desire to bring them to the fullness of the truth. And we will start piecemeal, bit by bit. Let's have a conversation over one topic. Maybe whether Peter is the rock, or maybe whether, what did Jesus mean? Is baptism necessary for salvation? Or, what did St. James mean by we're not saved by faith alone? Oh, yeah, just focus on one topic and dialogue about that over time and put the case, build your own knowledge in that area and put the case to the other over time. We shouldn't ever say to ourselves, hey, this is too much, therefore I'm not going to do anything.
Perfect. So one good thing is you've got a lot going on. I mean, you have written some books on apologetics. You have a great YouTube channel. You're doing 60-second videos on the faith on Instagram. Can you give us a little background on, or more specific information on the resources that are available for someone who might want to learn apologetics, how they can access your resources and take advantage of those?
Well, my YouTube channel, is a modest one compared to some of the really big and great ones. It's called Robert Haddad Defending Catholicism. I've got about over 600 videos of various lengths on that channel. The 60-second Apologist series is a recent one, only goes back to late last year, because I was advised by younger people, hey, they're not going to listen to the 1 hour or 90-minute videos, but get that 1 minute one out there and you can put it on Instagram, and it has worked. I mean, my 60-second apologist videos on YouTube get 600 views. On Instagram this week they got 14,000. There's a bigger audience there, and it's necessary. So I do have an Instagram account. Just type in Robert Haddad and you can see it there. It's an active account. I just uploaded a couple more videos this afternoon. The books that I write, I've got one book that's been published in America called 1001 Reasons Why It's Great to Be Catholic. And that was through Matthew Kelly's organization, Dynamic Catholic, or Modoki Press. That's the other arm of it. So there's that book available. Most of my books are available through Perusia Media, they've got a very good website. I'm not good at promoting my own books, and they're not in many shops. I normally sell them where I speak. So where I go to a venue, I take them with me and I sell them at the venue where I'm presenting. But you can get them on demand. Perusia does have printing facilities and um, uh, what do you call it, shipment facilities in the United States. So anyone in America who was interested in any of my books, my favorite book that I've written is Defend the Faith, which is 500 pages on 50 chapters, 50 topics, answering 166 objections against the Catholic faith. It's born 30 years ago. I began writing in 1994.
Wow.
I finished the fifth edition. The final edition came out in 2012. And it's a fruit of my own experiences, modeled on something similar to the question box that I mentioned earlier. Here's a question and answer book, and it's very helpful. It's pitched for people who aren't theologians, who don't know much, but they want to start learning. So each chapter can be read on average 10 minutes.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and it's heavily based in scripture. There's over 1,000 quotes from scripture. I've got the church fathers in there very strongly as well, and extracts from the Roman Catechism from the 16th century and the Catechism of the Catholic Church from the 20th century. So yeah, it's a solid resource, and I'm very happy to that I've written it. It's my signature book. I've written others. What's another one that I've written? I've written it. You'll find this one strange. I've written a children's book called Jesus Played Marbles, and you think, well, what's that about? Well, it is a fiction, but it's based on a marble game where Jesus has a game of marbles with his brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. And there's this one boy in the village named Joby who's persecuted by these boys. So Jesus, through the marble game, breaks down that prejudice, that the terrible treatment that his brothers inflict upon Joby. But the narrator in that book, then with each of those boys, when they have their turn, with their marble throw, the narrator tells us how that boy was really related to Jesus. So the book has a moral. It has a dual destination, a dual purpose. It has a moral for the parent reading it to the children, but it has an apologetical purpose, that is to identify that the brothers of Jesus were really his first cousins.
Nice.
Yeah.
One question on the Defend the Faith. Is that the book, you wrote a curriculum for high school students. Is that the same book? Perfect.
No,
yeah.
The one on the curriculum is Always Be Prepared. And that was the one part, the final part of my doctoral project. So my doctoral project was explore the new apologetics, and I looked at Catholic and non-Catholic sources to understand apologetics and new apologetics. Then I had to extract the principles of new apologetics, plus get data from Sydney Catholic schools as to where the students were with their faith, knowledge, and practice, and to construct a targeted curriculum, apologetics curriculum for senior secondary students. So it wasn't a project where it's not a curriculum that I just thought, oh, let's have these lessons because I think they need to know this. It was researched in knowing where the gaps are, where the weaknesses are in senior students in Sydney Catholic schools. And I can presume they'll be very similar with respect to senior students in the United States or other English-speaking countries. And then therefore have a 36 lesson course on apologetics in secondary schools. So it's not a book to read. They are lesson plans. And I thought, well, this might be useful. This might be helpful for people. And it's been constructed by Perusia Media, and I had an interview with Doug Keck from EWTN a few months ago. So it's sold a few hundred. It's not a great seller. I actually persuade people not to buy it if they think it's just a book to read, because it's not a book to read, it's a book to use. But another book that I've written that has some success in converting people is answering the anti-Catholic challenge, which I edited most of the book. I only wrote one chapter, but it was a systematic response to a book that came out in 2007 that was launched by the Sydney Anglicans, who were very hybrid evangelical
Yeah.
and reformed, very anti-Catholic, but gentlemen. They're pleasant people, but they are theologically very anti-Catholic. And they produced this book in '07 as a preemptive strike against the Sydney World Youth Day. So when I was at university chaplaincy in those years, I got a team of students together and we wrote a response to that book, and it's called Answering the Anti-Catholic Challenge. And that book has been, that's probably, each chapter is probably the best chapters I've ever been involved in when it comes to writing Catholic apologetics material, a different author for each chapter. And that has brought a number of people into the Catholic faith as a consequence of reading those responses.
That's great. So you've got resources for everything, really. Basic formation to a solid educational formation and apologetics. So
I
that's
also
good
must
stuff.
mention,
Yeah.
but all right, some of my generally my books are targeted at people who don't know much, but who want to know much. So
Yeah.
a lot of my books are introductory level. So I've got an introduction to the Church Fathers, the greatest Church Fathers. I got an introduction to early church history up until AD 476. These are very simple, popular books. People buy them in good numbers because with apologetics, we also have to know history.
Yeah.
And we have to know church history. We have to know also the fathers of the church. And the fathers of the church, people aren't going to read the 38 volumes that are out there that were written over, 8 centuries. They're going to, but we can give them extracts. Like
Yeah.
Father Jurgens did in the early 70s. He wrote that 3-volume set. That was basically a compendium, compilation.
Radio Replies, was that Radio Replies?
Oh no, Radio Replies is from the famous Australian priest.
Okay.
But
that was very instrumental,
yeah,
that book, in
yeah.
getting me a
Rumble,
good
Dr.
understanding of my
Rumble,
faith. Yeah.
Reverend Dr. Rumble. Yeah, that was fantastic. I've never read that, by the way.
No
I haven't
kidding.
read Radio Replies. I should, but that was fantastic in Sydney, Australia. That was in the heyday of apologetics from the 1930s to the early 60s. And that probably is old apologetics when you look at the style of Father Rumble and then others
Yeah.
like Belloc. It was a bit pugilistic,
Yes. Yeah.
and it responded to pugilism too. But as I said, the emphasis with new apologetics is trying to avoid that type of rancor, that
Yes.
type,
And
tension.
that may have been part of the issue with me in the beginning. When I really started turning toward learning the faith, it was in the late 80s, and there was no internet. And that was the first resource that I found. I bought all 3 books, and I just devoured them. And
Yeah.
now they've condensed them all into one volume.
Yeah, that's
books.
the one I've got.
Yeah.
By the way, I should mention another very important book for me. The second book I read after Question Box was Faith of Our Fathers by Cardinal Gibbons. Now that is a very, very important book for people to. It's an oldie but a goodie.
Perfect.
From Tam Books. I don't know if you've heard of it, Faith of Our Fathers by Cardinal Gibbons.
I don't think I have, but I'll look it up.
Look it up.
I will link all of these below for people that are interested in following up too. So
yeah, look it up and buy it, and it's a great American classic. Faith of Our Fathers by Cardinal Gibbons.
Got it. All right, so I've enjoyed this conversation. I could go on all day, but I know you've got things to do. Let's wrap up with a couple of Catholic questions. Who's your patron saint?
Well, I was confirmed as an adult, so I took the name of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. I'm very highly influenced by Saint Francis de Sales, and Saint Dominic of Guzman. So they're my 3 main saints when it comes to inspiration regarding, evangelization and apologetics.
Perfect. What about a Catholic devotion. Do you have a favorite one that you go to?
Well, I do. I am a daily mass goer, and I pray the Rosary 15 decades every day. And I also have a devotion to the Holy Souls in Purgatory, and among other things. That's basically it. I'm very rigid in my prayer life in the sense that I haven't changed since the late 80s.
Boy, we have a lot in common. I've got a prayer routine
Yeah.
that I go through every day, hell
Yeah,
or high
yeah.
water.
Routine's very important, you know. I mean, you only change if you're going to change to something better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Haddad, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me about this topic. I think we learned a lot. There's a lot here that people could take and follow up on to increase their own knowledge about the faith and hopefully become better evangelists and better examples for the people around them in their life. So I really appreciate the time, sir.
Bill, I really appreciate the invitation, and I just want to thank you. And I just also want to commend you on the fact that you're doing great work. We're all small people, but what we're called to do is do what we can where we are in our time. You're
Yes,
living out
sir.
your baptism, you're living out your confirmation. We're all just grains of sand on a big beach, but each grain is important. What you do is very important, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, sir. And thanks all of you for watching. And as always, siempre adelante.